Whenever the first see news about Mexico on TV or in the papers, the same questions always pop into my head. Every election season, politicians get gunned down by the cartels. Mass graves of innocent civilians keep turning up. It's one horrifying headline after another. Why can't their government get these criminal organizations under control? Is it that they won't or that they can't? Is even the president in bed with the cartels? Those are the kinds of questions I'm talking about. But as I started digging into Mexico as a country, I came to realize that completely wiping out the cartels isn't just hard, it might actually be impossible. October 2019, right in the middle of downtown Culiacan, Mexico. Hundreds of heavily armed gunmen surrounded a military base and opened fire with machine guns. They had one single demand: release the son of the captured drug lord, El Chapo. And incredibly, the Mexican government folded within just a few hours. They put out a humiliating statement: "We're releasing him to prevent further bloodshed." How is this even possible in a modern nation? Mexico, a top 15 economy in the world, gave up law enforcement, the very thing that defines a sovereign nation, because a criminal organization threatened them. People around the world are all asking the same thing. How can a country with a military and a police force fail to stop them? The answer isn't at the barrel of a gun. It lies in the massive, invisible cracks running through the entire system. The cartel's number one weapon for beating the state isn't what you'd expect. It's not guns. It's forced choices. There's one rule that governs all of Mexico: plata o plomo. Plata means silver. It represents bribery. We'll hand you more cash than you'd ever see in a lifetime. Just look the other way when our trucks roll through. Plomo means lead, as in bullets. Turn down the money, and tonight, a bullet will be waiting outside your little girl's school. Now imagine being a small-town cop or a low-level government worker staring down that choice. Your government paycheck is a joke, and the cartel is offering you dozens of times more. Say no, and it's not just you. Your entire family gets brutally murdered. And the government can't protect any of them. So the entire system ends up packed with bought and paid-for accomplices. Intelligence agents selling secrets to the cartels, cops escorting cartel drug shipments. This grotesque reality becomes just another day at the office. This is what systemic cancer looks like. On the outside, they're government institutions. On the inside, they've become cartel cells. But money alone can't overpower an entire country. The real game changer came in the late 1990s with the arrival of Los Zetas. They're the ones who split the history of Mexico's drug war into before and after. These guys originally came from GAFE, the Mexican Army's most elite special forces unit. The government had poured a fortune into training them in counterterrorism operations in the US and Israel. And then they betrayed their country and went to work as the cartel's private army. They started using the very skills meant to protect the nation, to tear it apart. The changes Los Zetas brought to the table were devastating. First, they took the tactics to a whole new level. What used to be street-level gang brawls got upgraded to full-blown conventional warfare. Wiretapping, drone surveillance, anti-tank weapons, all standard operating procedure. Second, they weaponized fear. They introduced psychological warfare, hanging corpses from bridges, posting brutal execution videos online. It completely broke the will of both civilians and law enforcement. Third, they diversified their revenue streams. They're not just selling drugs anymore. They tap into oil pipelines to steal fuel, take over mines, and collect taxes from avocado farms. The cartels are no longer just criminal gangs. They've become multinational holding companies pulling in tens of billions of dollars a year, armed with top-tier military firepower. If the government wants to take them on, it would need an all-out war. But half the national security apparatus is already on the cartel payroll, so intelligence leaks before the fight even starts. The government is far away, but the cartel is right here. In Mexico's remote villages, that's not a joke. It's a fact of life. Why would residents shield armed killers? Because the cartels have cunningly filled the void in social services that the government abandoned. In their strongholds, the cartels operate as a kind of shadow government. The government keeps stalling on road paving, school repairs, and church construction, claiming there's no budget. The cartels get it done in days with cold hard cash. They're basically building out public infrastructure. They even run direct relief operations. During the pandemic, it wasn't the Mexican government that was first to hand out food boxes to residents. It was an organization run by El Chapo's daughter. And the boxes had the cartel's logo stamped right on them. Here's the irony. In cartel-controlled territories, petty theft and robbery practically disappear, because the cartel executes anyone who disrupts order on the spot. Law enforcement has essentially been privatized. To the locals, these aren't brutal criminals. They're narco-santas who rescued them from poverty. So when the military and police come storming in, the residents literally put their bodies on the line to shield the cartel. They've won the most powerful defense there is, the hearts and minds of the people. Everyone blames the Mexican government for being incompetent, but the truth is, half of this tragedy falls on the United States, right across the border. The fundamental engine that allows Mexican cartels to overpower the state comes from American demand and supply. The United States is the world's largest consumer of illegal drugs. Tens of billions of dollars that Americans spend every year on fentanyl, cocaine, and other drugs flow straight into cartel coffers. Mexico actually has extremely strict gun laws. So where do all those rocket launchers and machine guns the cartels use come from? Over 90% of them are weapons that were once legally purchased in the US and smuggled across the border thanks to America's loose gun regulations. The dirty money the cartels rake in gets laundered through the tangled networks of Wall Street and global banks, then cycles right back into Mexico. In other words, the US is unwittingly serving as a massive supply base, handing the cartels cash and selling them weapons. No matter how many crackdowns Mexico launches, as long as that pipeline keeps flowing, it's like pouring water into a bucket with no bottom. For decades, the Mexican government and the US DEA stuck to the kingpin strategy. The logic was simple: take out the head, and the whole organization crumbles. But the results were a catastrophic failure. The cartels weren't a lizard, they were a hydra. When a big-time boss like El Chapo gets captured, the organization doesn't collapse. It splinters into multiple smaller groups. These fractured groups start fighting each other over territory, unleashing violence far more brutal and indiscriminate than before. They ramp up the terror just to avoid getting outcompeted. Right now, Mexico is in a state of total free-for-all. Dozens of smaller groups, locked in constant warfare, all orbiting two dominant players, the Sinaloa cartel and the Jalisco New Generation cartel. Every time the government takes down one boss, security actually gets worse. That's the cruel paradox. This is exactly what has the whole world watching Mexico in horror. Things have gotten so out of control that people are actually saying, it was more peaceful when one boss was running the show. This tragedy is no longer just Mexico's problem. The cartels have evolved into global criminal holding companies with tentacles reaching around the world. Remember the national state of emergency in Ecuador recently? A once peaceful country was paralyzed by gangs in just a matter of days, and Mexican cartels were pulling the strings behind the scenes. The Mexican cartels don't get their hands dirty directly. They bankroll local organizations across South America, provide the know-how, and lend out their brand. They're basically franchising a playbook that says, do it our way, and you can beat the government too. They're not just pushing drugs anymore. Online gambling, cryptocurrency laundering, they've even taken over the supply chains for everyday produce, like avocados and limes. That avocado sitting on your dinner table may very well have passed through the cartel's blood-soaked toll booth. Let that sink in. Every election season, hundreds of political candidates lose their lives at the hands of the cartels. The moment bullets, not ballots, decide who leads, that country has already set foot on the path of a failed state. So, is there truly no way to end this hellish war? Every approach that's been tried over the past several decades has exposed devastating limitations. Just send in the army and wipe them all out. Sounds simple enough, right? But as we've seen, the military itself is compromised, and taking out a boss just splinters the organization into even more uncontrollable violence. Others argue, legalize drugs and cut off their revenue. But the cartels already have countless backup businesses, human trafficking, resource extraction, you name it, they're not going down that easily. Experts say that ultimately, the only real path forward is rebuilding trust in the government, making cops value their government paychecks and their honor over cartel money, making citizens trust state welfare over cartel handouts. It's an agonizingly slow and painful process. And this is exactly why we can't just brush off Mexico's story as some scary stuff happening in someone else's country. A security vacuum doesn't just fall out of the sky one day. It's the tiny cracks, small-scale corruption among public officials, inconsistent law enforcement, and marginalized communities born from the wealth gap that pile up and eventually bring the entire dam of a nation crashing down. Mexico is asking us a question. Is your country healthy enough to protect you? Or has it already started rotting from the inside out, consumed by the logic of plata o plomo? Thank you. See you in the next story.